of our Moving Forward Positively webinars. As you know, this is a series of 5. We intend to obviously follow through on the entire series so that we provide everyone with a real basic grounding, because despite the fact, obviously, we've had some good news over the last little while about at least a light at the end of the tunnel regarding the opening of swimming pools in this province. The reality is we'll be going through several months of what will be relatively constant change, not just in the swimming world, but in the lives of our swimmers, the lives of our parents, the lives of ourselves outside of swimming, everything of which impacts the swimming world as well. So we're going to be forging ahead, and we are delighted, obviously, to have Dr. Frank Vandenberg here with us, leading the 3 webinars on the sort of mental performance and the components around that. For us, he led us through basically, if you like, the life cycle of behaviors in pandemics last week, and we're moving into more resilience and mental performance, the stuff that we're living day to day, and that you're going to also have to help not only the youngsters in your programs, but the adults as well. And one thing I just want to add at this point, I think it's very important, despite the fact that we are starting to become very excited about a return to the pool, that we calm ourselves down, and that we have some recognition of the realities still of the situation that we're in. We as a community cannot afford to make any mistakes as we roll forward. We want to be seen as a banner community and organization. I know many of you, and indeed also our leadership from our ED, the board, our technical group, key coaches, have built very good relationships with our key stakeholders and partners, and we want to keep those aspects going as we roll forward, and make sure that we seek clarity. If you need any help around any of the, at times, rather confusing terminologies that are used, the sometimes conflicting guidelines that are produced, you can always ask, and we will be here to provide you with some guidance around that. The key thing is, as we've said to you over the last few months, is to build very strong relationships with your own key stakeholders, and particularly your facility operators and key personnel. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Frank. He's going to take over the screen and take us through tonight's topic of resilience and mental performance, after which we'll have some time for some questions on this subject, and we can also tell you a little bit about our move forward plan for swimming in Alberta, given yesterday's announcement. So thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you had another good day, and thank you for joining us in this webinar. Yeah, before we get into the meat of things here, when it comes to pacing ourselves, that's, I think, really important for now. Like, I think everyone was kind of taken by surprise yesterday with the announcement of our provincial government to fast track certain aspects in the relaunch plans, and including recreational facilities, sports activities, pools, etc. And just from a note from the Canadian Sporting Institute Calgary, the surprise hit us just as hard, because we've been kind of thinking we can maybe start doing some more things like a month from now, maybe at least. But yeah, everyone wants to kind of get going, but that can only happen in a best possible way. And we realized that we need to really be organized and be prudent in everything we do before we have training groups come back in. And we realized that we have some work to do in getting ourselves organized. Staff needs to be trained, and a lot of the new procedures and protocols, and as well as the psychosocial aspects of return to training, need to be addressed before we can actually do all of those things fine. So, pacing ourselves is really important. Yeah, here you see kind of the layout of what we're doing. Last week I talked about the pandemic response, and and how that affects us, and how we can stay well and healthy throughout all of this. There is a lot of uptake in our world of high performance sport about using mental performance and resilience in particular to work through the current situation well. And I want to share some of this information with you, because I think it's really good to see that this information is usually very, very effective and helpful in sport performance, but it also helps us really to adapt to new situations and challenges as we face them. So that's what we're going on today. I'd like to keep the slide in. I think it's really, really important. I'm not talking to athletes here. I'm talking to you as coaches and leaders, and obviously you have that position as a role model, and maybe passing on some of the information, or being an advocate for it. Maybe it can apply to yourselves, but most definitely maybe in how you would want to address, or how you would want to assist some of the people that you work with in your clubs and teams. Just to reiterate, I'm not going to go through all of this. A lot of the information that we're working with and that you're receiving through this webinar is very, very current. This is kind of ongoing work at a high pace for us in all kinds of sports, sport organizations, and where sport is being done. And I think it's really cool to be receiving this from the front lines, I guess. So resilience. If you want to be successful and healthy, you want to discover and develop resilience. You want to find out what it is and how you can actually become maybe even more resilient. From the dictionary, it's really stated as the power or ability to return to the original form, position, after being bent, compressed, or stretched, elasticity, or the ability to recover readily from illness, depression, adversity, or the like, a certain level of buoyancy. And although this is kind of a well understood definition of resilience, where we kind of bounce back, in the sports psychology literature, it is actually extended a little bit more. That makes it even more effective for how it can add to our performance in sport. And it's being explained as a dynamic process that is kind of ongoing, encompassing the capacity to maintain regular functioning through diverse challenges. And this is a really important aspect of it. So, also to effectively rebound following adversity. But maintaining regular functioning through our challenges is probably a much more proactive way of looking about how resilience can suit us. And we can do that through means of very facilitative resources that I'm going to kind of share with you in the next few minutes. This is kind of the model that has been kind of used to kind of maybe visualize a little bit what we're talking about. So we're impacted by various stressors, various challenges, various situations in life and in sport that may have some impact on us. And it really depends about how we look at these stressors and challenges in order to come out on the other end in a much more productive and effective way. And you can see that a number of psychological factors play into this, and I'm going to highlight these a little later on. But the whole appraisal of the challenge that we're facing is kind of the most important part. And you may have heard this from other sources where it talks about coping, is that the stressor in itself is probably important to face or to embrace or to work with. But the way we think about it, the way we handle it, is kind of the defining factor here. And then towards how we can perform best. What is resilience? Just a few things to consider. As I said, resilience is the ability to withstand pressure, to maintain regular functioning, and also use our personal qualities to be doing this. Ability to maintain functioning, both well-being and performance, when we're under pressure. So these are very common situations in sport and competitive sport and high-performance sport. So it's actually very good to be figuring out how we can actually maintain our functionality and be performing well under those types of situations and challenges. As I said earlier, it's a dynamic process, so an ongoing process that goes back and forth, resulting from an interaction of the individual, the athlete or coach or myself, and the environment that we're working in. And also, I'd like to kind of stress that resilience can be a very preventative and proactive approach to managing stress. So to be building resilience means that we may be able to work under stress better and actually to have less impact on ourselves, whether it's our performance or our well-being. At the same token, I also like to explain what resilience is not. It's not a rare special quality found only in very special people. It is not a fixed trait, rather something that we can develop and that we can work with on an ongoing basis as situations change, as challenges come across. And obviously, the current challenges are maybe a little different as what we're finding ourselves in competitive swimming or in any kind of competitive sport or training. Under these circumstances of this pandemic, we find new challenges that we want to kind of find a resilient way of handling it. It's not found exclusively within a person, as I said. It's an interaction with the environment, and the environment is really important. At the end of this piece on resilience, you will see that the environment plays a huge role in which resilience can come about in our behavior and in our performance. Resilience is also not the absence or suppression of emotions. It's not that emotions are not real, that are not valid, that are not even, that they're undesirable. One big reason we like sport, because it does evoke emotions in us, both on the positive side as well as on the negative side. And to give those emotions a place is a really important part of it. So acknowledging them and kind of working through them or working with them to be better at the end. So what resilience is not is just as important as what understanding what resilience is. I'm going to focus on these aspects, the personal qualities that we can all develop and that can help us in finding that more resilient approach, or that more resilient approach to challenge, combined with an environment that helps us. And again, I'm going to come back to that. But really leading to a mindset that we call challenge mindset, and that is a much more different way of looking at things than we sometimes react to, or sometimes we think about in the first place. And I'll give you some examples. By the way, some of these slides, not necessarily this one, I'm using in my work with athletes, partly because I'd like to have them experience certain things, and partly because I don't want to be too academic about things. So you will see a few slides that are typically aimed for working with younger athlete populations. So when it comes to those personal qualities, you see them all listed here, and it's all being kind of illustrated and researched. A positive personality doesn't mean that you always want to be smiling, but it does mean that you have a positive attitude, a positive approach to what you're about to do. For example, swimming or training, or even racing competition. Positive personality really ties in a level of curiosity. Like, let me be interested to see what can happen here. Basically, having a much more open approach to the challenges of sport and some of the stresses, I guess. Optimizing motivation is always an important factor. Motivation is huge. Really knowing why you want to do this, why you want to do this activity, why you want to do this sport, why is this sport so exciting for you? What do you like so much about you? And also, what would you like to accomplish through the sport? It's a really important piece, and as we're moving into kind of return to training type of situations shortly, in a few weeks' time, it is also really important to figure out, okay, and what is the motivation that I bring to this new environment? What is the motivation that I bring into training that is different from what I'm used to. So having some openness about what we're doing here and what we're trying to accomplish is really important. Confidence is obviously the big one, and you know, what are the resources that we can pull from to build that confidence? How can we give people, athletes, coaches, you know, good constructive feedback that helps them feel good about themselves or what they're trying to do? And sometimes it's a time, but timing is maybe not of the essence right now. So maybe now is much more about effort, about how you approach the session, about what you're getting accomplished in a particular session that is going to be a bit different. The ability to switch focus and maintain focus on the things that are important, you know, before, during, and after workouts, or your whole participation is important. And finally, again, tying back into the, you know, the facilitated environment. What's the support behind it? What are, you know, you as coaches and leaders do to help these young athletes be comfortable and be prepared for what they're going to do in their sessions. Dryland, off, you know, out of the pool, in the pool, on and off the deck, I should say, I guess. So these are some of the personal qualities that we can attend to and actually make stronger, develop over time as we go through this process. I'm going to give you an example of an exercise here that I would do with groups of athletes. And it's really about that you can choose your mindset. You can choose, you know, as in you can choose how you want to see things. And it would be most fun if you would all unmute yourself and just do this exercise with me as if I would do it with a group of athletes. I encourage you, I invite you to unmute yourself. If you don't unmute yourself, it's fine. I'm going to show you a picture, and I'd like you to say out loud and right away what you see. So say out loud and right away what you see. Okay, one more time. Say out loud and right away what you see. Here it comes.
Bunny.
Bird.
Bunny.
Duck.
Oh, duck, yeah.
Duck. Bunny. Duck. Yes. There's both a bunny and a duck in the picture. And it's really, you know, there is maybe a first impression. It may be the duck, it may be the bunny, but there is a second impression. And it's really important to realize that we can have a second impression if we look at it again, that we can look at it from a different angle and actually see something different in the same image, in the same situation. And that's really important. If the first impression, the duck or the bunny, is the good one, then go with it, then roll with it. But if you don't like what you see, if that first impression, that duck or bunny, is not something you like, you may want to see it. You may want to look if you see something else. So here's a second one. So please unmute yourself and say out loud and right away what you see. Here we go.
Woman.
Man playing a saxophone.
Yeah.
Oh,
Man playing a saxophone. A lot of people see a man with a saxophone. But there's also the face of a woman. Yes. that we look at from the front. So again, it's one of those pictures that can help us understand that we can see something different if we look at it from a different angle. And then I tell the athletes, okay, here's the most difficult one, okay, and here it comes. You say out loud and right away what you see.
woman with a book.
From behind. Old lady.
Old lady, young lady, they're both in there. And this is maybe a little harder to see, but yeah, the old lady kind of looks down to the left. And the old lady's eye is kind of the ear of the young lady that looks away into the back of the screen here. So maybe I've helped you a little bit. The whole point here is, obviously you probably got the gist, is about that we can look at a particular situation and we can actually ask ourselves, how do we see it, and is there something else to see? It's not necessarily can I see it more positively, although that could be also helpful, but is there another way that we can look at this that informs me about what I can do in this particular situation? And it really comes back to when we're thinking about pressure and failure and adversity, is the same type of distinction. Are we seeing this as a threat? You know, do I feel this, you know, kind of fear of failure? Am I worried about things that are going to happen? Or can I stretch myself, can I push myself to look at the same situation, same picture and see if there's a challenge and see if there's an opportunity that I'd like to explore, that I'd like to find a response to. So that's maybe a practical way of looking at things in different ways. So this happens a lot, like in life and in sport. It's these thinking traps. People sometimes tend to jump very quickly to conclusions without necessarily, doing due diligence about figuring out what actually is happening. So they're just too quick in some of their thinking and their conclusions. Tunnel vision, you're missing out on other aspects that you may want to consider. Sometimes tunnel vision is good, and maybe under certain circumstances, but sometimes you also want to kind of widen the scope and see a little bit more to have a different type of appraisal or consideration about it. This happens a lot, like magnifying problems, and that there's it's just a lot to take in, and there's so much to do, and I don't know how I would solve this. And also minimizing your own resources, your own abilities, your own ways that you can actually help yourself. So personalizing, taking things personal. Sometimes it's just something that you did that wasn't necessarily meant, doesn't have anything to do with you as a person, but sometimes people take that. Externalizing, it's not my fault, finger pointing, it's someone else's fault, it's the conditions, it's whatever it is, it's, paying, we call it external attribution. We're paying too much attention to what happens outside of us without necessarily looking inside. How do we participate in this particular situation? What is our role in this? Overgeneralization, what I would say to young athletes, everything sucks. Well, that's not the case usually, not everything. Usually there's a few things that are not quite right, but usually there's also a few things that are just fine. And so to have a little bit of a better, more balanced approach to what you're looking at, and rather thinking that everything is wrong, is probably a wise thing to consider. Mind reading, like thinking that you know what someone else is thinking or is going to say to you. And sometimes that's right, but often that's not so accurate. So just thinking about that trap. And finally, emotional reasoning, where we basically base our whole decision making and everything that we do based on how we feel. And to separate that is sometimes useful as well. So this is just a little list of what can commonly happen. And so we want to stay away from that. And I have this kind of little list here about positive focus and what can we actually do to focus on things that help us. I should maybe say helpful focus, not positive focus. But it is articulated in positive ways. Start thinking about how you were going to solve this. What's the solution in this, rather than thinking about the ongoing problem that you already know about. It's kind of dwelling on the problem rather than, really committing to how you're going to move forward and how you're getting out of this. Focus on what you can do is obviously very important. It's those controllables, and I have a few more words on that later. Focus on what you have and not on what you have not. It's okay to have desires, like I want to have better skis. I want to have more time in the pool. There's all these things that you may not have, but why don't you kind of work and focus on what you do have that makes you kind of successful, or at least maybe enjoyable at the same time. This is an important one, focus on what you can gain. How can you get better through this? What is something that will assist you rather than that hinders you? So that's another way of looking at what positive focus can do for you. And finally, what are some reasons that you can think about why you will be successful, and why won't you focus on those things? So it's really enabling rather than disabling these types of bullets. And when I give this type of list to athletes, for example, I never expect that they find answers to all of them, but maybe there is one that really jumps out that can help them in a particular situation. Yeah, there's this whole idea about what the fixed and the growth mindset, and then I've just added a challenge mindset to it, because it gives us much more options. If you're kind of thinking about what fixed mindset can stand for, is what you can do and how smart you are. You got it or you don't. You believe that skills are born. believe that you're not in control of what you can do. You're focusing on performance outcomes and what those mean, and sometimes you're also focusing on not looking bad. And that can be real tendencies that I educate athletes on, about how to recognize that, and in training and competition, and hopefully turn it around. On the other hand, you see, the contrary almost. Skills and skills are grown and developed over time. That's why we do so much practice. That's why we spend so much time in the pool. We do things that we want to be better in, and really, aiding and adding to our abilities, thinking that we can build these skills and become better in the process. Focus on the process rather than the outcome. Like, how am I getting this job done? How am I going to do this race? How am I going to get it back into this training environment with these new procedures and protocols? There's going to be a little bit of a process to it, and obviously on improvement. Now, I had prepared a very fun video, and Jackie before the call just said, yeah, that's a great video, but we've tested it and I can show it to you, but you can't really hear what's going on. So Jackie, if you wouldn't mind, if you have found the link to this particular video on his website or on YouTube or something, it's about the zoo tiger, and it's a very fun video and a narrative why we want to not be a zoo tiger, but rather be a jungle tiger. And obviously, this is all about imagery and storytelling, and I think it goes really well with some of the younger athletes in our midst. So I won't show this, and it also saves us a little bit of time, so that's kind of fine. Oh, it starts. And then the other aspect is, so we talked a little bit about those personal qualities that will really aid in developing resilience. We talked about that challenge mindset and how you can stretch yourself or push yourself or ask yourself how you can change the mindset around in something that works for you better, rather than being a victim of something that you don't want to be. And the other component here is the environment. And I just want to make it fairly simple and show you this kind of this diagram, where basically you see basically a comparison between challenge levels on the left side from low to high, and also the support levels on the bottom from low to high. And you can actually identify some of these environments in these ways, and you can see very clearly that if the challenge level is low and then the support level is low, it's really an environment not much is happening. It can also be very high challenge level with low support, which can be unrelenting. Now, in high performance, or in your performance, in the performance of your athletes, sometimes a particular time for this unrelenting environment may be very beneficial, very helpful. It may just mean training very hard, and maybe dictated by also a training program, but it can't stay there because it's not sustainable. People will burn out. People will not, continue to like that type of environment. So you got to be doing something else. Obviously, we're advocating here that for building your resilience, you want to kind of have high challenge levels combined with high support levels. And what that means is that you're very attentive to what your athlete group or your athletes need in pushing them versus kind of holding them back a little bit more. And so that is kind of reading into how athletes will respond to certain training practices or to certain stimuli, and to make choices as a coach on how you would maneuver in there. Now, I've been thinking in preparation of this particular webinar and knowing this particular diagram that it is very, for me, it's very clear or conceivable that as we're returning back into a training environment somehow and sometime, I think we should definitely start with making that environment very comfortable in the beginning. And again, next week I'm going to talk much more about what we can do to assist in that particular effort. But when it comes to eventually pushing athletes to their kind of peak performance, sometimes a comfortable environment could be good for recovery purposes, for different skill building type of exercises, but sometimes you want to push the challenge level in athletes up a little bit, and part of this is also working obviously through mistakes and failures and how they can assist you in getting better. So obviously you have a lot to do with creating an environment that helps your athletes. I'm sure you're used to doing this on an ongoing basis before COVID-19, and it's changed. It's going to be different about how we can re-enter this environment and what we need to be doing to progress. And I guess progression with a decent level of understanding and pace that fits the requirements and fits the standards that we hold ourselves accountable to. Now, I think a last slide on what can I do to improve my resilience, and there is a number of items that you may want to think about. So view decisions as choices, not sacrifices. Decisions are good and choices are good, but once you make a choice in one way or another, then go with it. Often I speak with athletes and they kind of 50-50, they don't know exactly what to do, and we'll talk it out and they come up with and I just borrowed this particular diagram to be basically showing that we have choices here, that there are things that are within our control. And maybe the most important one to start off with is your own attitude about how you go about things. I just said a lot about the challenge mindset. That speaks about the attitude about how you want to how do you want to go about the situation, what type of choices you're making. You have control about your physical distancing. You have control over your actions. You probably have control about how creative you can be in finding ways to train from home, or when you get back into a pool in certain ways, how you can be creative there. And there's a lot of things that we do not have control over necessarily. Maybe some a little bit more than others, and you can read them all. But the important piece here is that all these examples start with what if. And what if can be a useful strategy to problem solve possible challenges, but I'm going to suggest to reword that. I'm going to share that with you in a minute. What if is really, if you do what if, it really becomes very concerning. It leads to heightened levels of anxiety or doubt. So what if you hear me say this, what if you change what if into if this then that? So you're acknowledging that one of these situations may occur, but you're now kind of forcing yourself to be thinking, okay, but if this happens, then I will approach it this way, then I can do that. So again, it's a much more proactive approach to be looking at the things that you may not control inherently, but you can control how you respond to it. That's really the main message here. Identify your motivation. I already spoke about it. Figure out the why. Why are we doing this? Why are we liking this? What are we trying to do? And for young athletes, it would be a lot about we want to be together again. All right, let's work on that. Let's work on be together. And how can that work? We want to swim again. Okay, how can that work? I love swimming, so I'd like to get back in that. Take responsibility for your actions and thoughts. That includes the mistakes that you may make. Those mistakes you will able to to teach you how you would maybe do better next time, and therefore you you're learning. What can I do right now to be better? So a simple question that may prompt you with one or two options or solutions to make a change in the moment. Use your support, use the people around you, increase your positivity ratio. So I already talked about positive personality. I give athletes a very simple tool, and I basically say, give me 2 things that work for you, and give me 2 things that you would like to do different. And so that balances out a little bit. Not everything is great, not everything is bad, but let's figure out a way that we can balance about how we think about what we do okay, and I actually start with that. What are you doing well? And ask yourself, be a learner for yourself. What is useful here? What are my available choices? So I'm going to just wrap up this piece. This was all about, resilience and what it entails, and how you can actually attempt to becoming more resilient in certain ways or certain situations. The last few slides are just a little bit about mental performance in general, and I think these are really important messages. Some of them you've seen, and I think there's a resource I'm going to share with you that is super helpful for you, based on also some of the questions that you had last week. Sorry. So this is my short list. Nothing special, but this is my short list about how you get good in sport. Yeah, there may be a bit of talent, but I'm not banking on talent. I'm working with my clients, with my athletes and coaches to the best they can be, whatever that means. So talent may be good, may be nice, but it's never enough. How can you bring more out of what you've got? But the other 4 areas, physical fitness, technical skills, tactics, and mental fitness, are areas that you can become much, much better in. And this is where most of the training goes to, lots of labs, lots of sessions, lots of physical fitness training, a lot of technical skills development, game race tactics. There's a lot of emphasis on those things, and obviously mental fitness has become part of what performance is about. And when I explain this to young athletes, I point them to a race car, and I basically say, think about those 4 aspects as tires of your race car, and if one of those tires is not inflated enough, you're probably not able to go as fast. And if one of those tires deflates or blows out, then you find yourself in a different problem. So it's important to keep those tires in good shape. And so what can you do on the mental fitness side? Now, this resource, I encourage you all to download from sportforlife.ca. You can download it there for free. Search for mental fitness for LTAD, because it's a really useful resource. I'm going to have one more slide on what it actually does. But in this particular document that we've developed in 2013, mental fitness refers to an athlete's ability to optimally regulate thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and act in a purposeful and consistent manner, while also coping with the demands that are placed on him or her. And the true aim of developing mental fitness is, first of all, to maximize performance, obviously through mental performance development, to engage in quality training, but also to maintain a healthy level of mental well-being. So throughout the various, age groups that are based on, different ages or different maturity levels and different competitive levels, we've broken down suggestions for mental fitness development in some of the core principles that we find important at these particular stages. We have identified a number of mental fitness activities that can be helpful, but also key messages for athletes, for coaches, for parents that can promote the mental fitness development during the stage. And I think that if you would study this resource a little bit, you'll find many nuggets that you probably could use in your own practice. A couple more things. Oh yeah, this is what it basically comes down to. This is the simplest way you can think about mental fitness or sports psychology. It's about what I say to myself or what I think. It's about what I see in my mind. It's about what I feel or how I feel, and also how I act, how I behave, how I perform. And that's kind of the most simple way of thinking about what we're trying to achieve here, is to find ways to improve these things. and they're very, very relevant before, you know, training, before competition, before a race, while you're racing or swimming, but also afterwards to assist with learning. So raising awareness is kind of half the work. We need to kind of know what we're talking about before we can actually make an effort in maybe changing or improving something. And in the process, we actually start learning and hopefully experiencing success. So maybe that's a kind of an interesting, simple way to be looking at what we're trying to do. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, you know, fundamental skills, the big five. Most of you kind of know about these. What I want to point out here is that, for example, goal setting and also imagery are very interesting skills that we're applying right now as we're changing focus into return to training, because the goals probably needs to be set in different ways, not only sport focused or performance focused, but maybe also how we adapt to this new training environment, and helping athletes understand or even visualize what that new training environment looks like before we're actually starting to work in that. So those are very applicable skills that that we're using right now with a number of different athletes and sports. Just a few last comments. You know, just being the advocate. Mental performance, mental training is really for fit and healthy athletes that just want to, you know, get better. Doing things more often helps us to get better. So repetition does work, not only in physical conditioning, also in mental training. Sometimes it takes a little longer before we see the results. And we want to also be deliberate about it, like having a mindset about, okay, we're actually making this part of our program and see how we can make a change. That really concludes the information that I wanted to share with you around resilience and mental performance. My screen has changed, but I hope that you can still see me or that you've been hearing me. I welcome questions that you may have or have a bit of a discussion on these things.
Okay, so how we'll do this is like last week. If you want to type your question into the chat box, and then I'll sort of regurgitate it to Frank. And while you're thinking about this, I'm just going to do a little bit of a summary for you on some of the critical points. As you know, we're trying to pack a lot of information into a short period of time to be, you know, very aware of the amount of time that you actually have. That's why Frank has gone to great lengths to be able to provide you with resources. Jackie did put the link to the YouTube video for you, and also the mental fitness document on the Sport for Life website for you, and also why we are obviously providing these webinars through the Swim Alberta resource base for you, so that you will have these. We wanted to build, if you like, this library moving forward, as we want to do with all aspects. I did want to stress this last aspect that Frank really alluded to. I think it's very important for you to start to build some goal setting with your youngsters and your higher performers as we move into the potential to be able to swim before the Labor Day weekend. What are you actually trying to do? We will be sending out some guidelines around this aspect for you, to give you some sort of pointers as to what type of work you want to get done in this sort of, it's not a macro cycle as such, it's more going to be like a meso cycle because of the length is likely to be, and why we might want to take a break through the Labor Day weekend and the first bit of September before we get into the first macro cycle proper. And then this aspect of imagery. Imagery will be very important, because the environment that we're all going back into will not look exactly like it has in the past. And for the next several months, it's going to be somewhat altered. And as I warned you all at the start, it's going to be, you know, in a state of flux. This isn't in and of itself a bad thing. It's just the reality. And as Dr. Vandenberg has really tried to stress to you, it's actually how we react to this, which we are totally in control. So we can throw out our arms and say it's all negative, or we can say, this is just the way it is, and we are going to do the best with each training minute that we actually have, and whether it's dry land or in the water. So these elements that Frank is giving to you around the checklists to think about for your own behaviors, for you, for your other coaches, for the swimmers themselves for sure, and even extending out to anyone else within your own support environment, dry land specialists, parents, and even your board of directors, so that we have a very positive outlook and we are in control of the things we can control. And I think part of the sort of learned helplessness that we've had over the last little while is people have been really sort of focusing on the things that are totally beyond our control. And that's not true across the entire board, but it's I think we tend to have that tendency at times. And I hope with some of the earlier slides that Frank showed you that we can shift this. I thought the analogies around changing what if into a way of actually saying, if this happens, what can I do about it? So you move the if and the what about to make it a little bit more of a positive result of the way you think. And that's a very fine example. And obviously the diagrams, the figures, you know, the bunny and the bird, for example, of looking at the same situation, but just slightly differently. And it's not that emotion is taken out of it. In fact, there's nothing wrong with the emotions that we have. And part of emotional intelligence is about recognizing those emotions, but it's how we deal with them. And so the whole of these first 3 webinars is to help provide us with an understanding of that and some practical tools. But as Frank really pointed out, in exactly the same way we do repetition training physically, we're only going to get good at these things if we constantly practice the mental side of it. And remember, one of the key things that any coach actually has control over is the training environment. You set, if you like, the flavor, the environment, the scene, the expectations. You control that, whether you've got a big budget or a tiny budget, whether you've got a big squad or tiny squad. So really start to think about how you can apply these things and shape that environment, which Frank's clearly underlined as being so important in contributing towards a resilient body of athletes and yourself as a resilient coach. Now, as we did with last week, if we don't necessarily have any specific questions and you want to review these things, please, you can send questions through either, you've got Frank's email there, either to myself or Kevin or Jackie in the interim time, and we will obviously strive to either answer them through the course of the week, or next time we can ask a little bit more. Oh, I see a question's come in here from Alison, and it says, as a school teacher, I have felt the children's fear and depression, good point, as they've tried to journey through this. What do you suggest, or how to start with these little guys?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question, and that really resonates with me because again, you will actually hear some of this next week, because we're going to go in much more detail around the psychosocial aspects around this return to training, but basically as an extension of this experience about what we have gone through over the last 2-3 months. And one of the suggestions that we're making is to provide a platform, a social context, a space, a time to reconnect before going into the pool, to have chats about what have you done in the last couple of months? What is something that you've never done before that you now did? So really to get people kind of expressing or sharing their experience in the first place. I think I don't want to make it too daunting or sound too daunting, but talking about, hey, what have you realized during this time of confinement, and you can play with your buddies, and those are real experiences. And I'm not asking you to be that counselor necessarily. I just suggest to provide a space and a time where the kids that you're working with can reconnect yes, it may be around swimming, but even if swimming is not happening now or next week or the week after, and even before you go into the pool again, is there a way that you can actually bring people together and not have the emphasis on the sport necessarily, but much more on the experience? And I will also like to tie in that notion of motivation, like what have you been missing in the sport? Why do you like your sport so much? What are you looking forward to experience again when you get back into the water? And so these are real good conversations to be having, not necessarily focusing on the anxiety or the fear or depression. Just talk about daily types or everyday types of experiences that we all have gone through. I think it's a really valuable exercise. And you learn something from each other, right? It's people may not know things from each other about what they have gone through or what is new.
Yeah, and Alison goes on to say, yes, she says she recognizes that this is an excellent idea, and to reinforce what Frank says, not to shy away from this. As you saw very clearly in this presentation, the creation of that environment where you address these aspects. And remember the diagram he showed with the 4 quadrants, and that top right quadrant where you had both a relatively high challenge, but you had a very high level of support. And that you could move from maybe that low challenge, which we will be suggesting both physically and emotionally, but with good support, and then gradually moving to that facilitative environment where you have a higher challenge now, but the kids and your staff and even the parents still feel very supportive. So there's great opportunity for us as a community to move often away from that unrelenting environment, which we often just live in as a default, or even the stagnant one at times, and move much more to the right-hand side. Okay, we have another one here from Rianne Haynes, and she says, I worry we are entering a time whereby the ability to reconnect and return to training will be more difficult as summer vacation season begins. Very good point. This can be exacerbated by the uncertainty in executing our plans. How do we protect against starting something we cannot finish, or at least does not happen at the speed we would like? Well, I'll let Frank deal with that first, but I have some very clear thoughts on that aspect from a global point.
Yeah, correct. Well, it's a good reality. Again, it's part of the reality. We're just getting back into some thinking about how we can do this, and then the summer months are upon us. So I'm suggesting then that to really be proactive with this kind of reconnection at this time, and really have some of this pre-work, making this environment more comfortable. Starting really now, and then at some point everyone realizes that they go off on holidays or be away for the summer, but at least you have a point of connection, and you have a conversation about various things, and whether it's dryland related, or whether it's goal setting related, or whether it's motivation related, or whether it's experience related. But it's probably easier to pick up maybe after the summer, or when people come back again, once you have already kind of gone through it. I see it as kind of phase 2 of reconnection, really after the summer. So that's my kind of quick answer to that one.
Sorry, I didn't have my mic on. I think that's an excellent question again, Rianne. And so the key thing from my standpoint is almost that underused phrase of under-promising and over-delivering, and this aspect of the goal setting. Don't promise the world, baby steps. Create this environment, which you can definitely do with or without the pool, about talking through things. Okay, you can definitely do that. And now with the ability to actually meet in person with some physical distancing, you could bring the group together to talk about the future, talk about the things that have happened and where we are right now, and the exciting aspect that things are changing for them. We saw an announcement by schools in Saskatchewan, for example, that schools in Saskatchewan from kindergarten to grade 12 will be returning to in class in the fall. And one would expect that this might start to happen in other provinces. So things are changing rapidly for the better. I think the other thing is around the goal setting, whether you get in the pool or not beforehand, is what can you really achieve before there is a bit of a break? And to recognize that that period in and around the Labor Day weekend and the first couple of weeks of September will be a high stressful period for everyone, for the kids, for the parents, for us, because it's such a state of flux. But the key thing is, as Frank has really reinforced with us, is about creating this dialogue. Just as you've pointed out, we need to talk, we need to not shy away from some of the challenges, but we need to lay out, okay, this has happened, so what are we going to do about it? And again, as I said, baby steps, take it, be easy on yourself and the kids in these first few weeks in particular. Is about what you can do. Okay. I see Alison has come back with another one. She says, on the other hand, most children are going to need something like this because travel is going to be minimum. And I'm not sure a lot of families, well, actually, that's a good point as well. It's not as though the rest of this summer will be a typical summer. So again, talking this through, and I want to stress this, it's very clear, as Frank has shown us, about this opportunity to engage and actually and really talk things through in a very measured way, and build that level of trust back again with everyone involved. And I do think it's also a double-pronged approach. I think you need to have some parent meetings as much as you do with your athletes as well, and particularly the parents of your younger athletes, because they need to be supportive in the background as well.
That's a good point, Steve. On I'm going to say a national team and next generation level, before we get into any type of return to training and group base and how that's going to work, including all the aspects that we already talked about, we are doing town hall meetings, because that needs to be kind of that information needs to be kind of shared, and parents are part of that picture because they live with their young athletes. We also have learned over the last week even that the town hall meetings and sharing information by itself is not enough. People may have selective attention or may not remember everything. And so to be following up with kind of the next time that you're coming together is to go over some of this information again and actually show them and model them how certain things are going. Those are all very, very helpful steps. You may not get as much pool time, but at the same time, creating that environment that people can be in is maybe the first goal to be achieving.
Okay, so we're right on the button in terms of time. And as I said, we wanted to really appreciate your time, and rather to keep things concentrated in this presentation, give you time to think about things. That's another reason for doing these as sort of weekly intervals. I'd encourage you to go to our Swim Alberta site so you can reevaluate the first webinar if you missed it, or just go over some things again and start to build your own knowledge base. And then once Jackie has posted this one, which she's very quick at doing, you can back it up with this particular one as well. And as I said, I reinforce, if you have any questions for us between now and next week, then we're here for you to answer those. And if we have some very clear, strong sort of themes, we will make sure we bring those up within the next webinar as well. So first of all, thank you very much, Frank, for your time. Really appreciate the expertise and the amount of time you're putting into this, and particularly with a focus for our community, not just some regurgitated thing. It's been excellent. And to everyone that's come onto the call, we value your time. We are really trying to make sure that we provide you with the best possible practical guidance we can. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Good evening.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much, Frank. That's awesome. Okay, good night, everybody. Take care.